When we think of dance, we often think about beauty and grace. But Mahesh Dattani's Dance Like a Man makes us look deeper. Through this work, he asks some very important questions. Questions like what happens when an art form becomes a battlefield for identity, gender, and tradition? What does it really mean to dance like a man in a society where masculinity is tightly policed, where women struggle for agency, and where cultural heritage has been reshaped by colonial shadows? Dattani came into Indian theatre at a very important moment. For a long time, English language theatre in India mostly meant translations and adaptations, but Dattani changed that. He began writing plays about the contemporary urban world and used themes and languages that felt real to middle and upper middle class audiences. His style has even been called urban speak because it captured the rhythms of everyday English in India. With that, he started a new tradition in Indian English theatre. It might feel like Dance Like a Man is just about two dancers and their ambitions, but when you go deeper, you realize it is about the weight of history pressing upon their every step. It is also about fathers and sons, mothers and daughters, about art that liberates and art that imprisons. From the forgotten devadasi tradition to the sanitized performances of the middle class, from questions of gender performance to the lingering presence of colonial morality, Dattani wrote a story that is as much about India as it is about the individual. But before we begin, I should say this: the video is not a summary of the play. It is best watched after you have read or watched Dance Like a Man, because what I am going to do here is look at the text through certain critical lenses rather than retelling the entire story. I'll talk about the title of the play, explore the struggles with gender roles, trace the history of Bharatanatyam in the play, confront colonial legacies, and finally reflect on the haunting vision with which the play ends. But before all that, hello and welcome to School of Literature. My name is Monica. I am a senior research fellow at Department of English Studies, Central University of Jharkhand. The title itself will make you stop and think. Why do you think there is an emphasis on a man dancing? In this play, the question of a man dancing becomes bigger. It becomes about identity, gender, and what society allows or denies a man. Take the character of Jairaj, for example. For him, dance is not a hobby. It is his life. But his father Amritlal simply cannot accept that. To Amritlal, who was once a freedom fighter and now the patriarch of the family, being a man means being strong, respectable, and financially secure. And in his eyes, dance does not fit that definition. He even says, a woman in a man's world may be considered progressive, but a man in a woman's world is pathetic. That one line really shows how rigid his view of masculinity is. So when Jairaj decides to grow his hair long, learn kuchipudi, or follow his guru with complete dedication, Amritlal sees it as shameful and even dangerous. For him, cricket would have been acceptable, but not dance. In this way, Jairaj's passion for Bharatanatyam is seen as weakness and even emasculation. Amritlal is the most imposing version of man in the play. He is the custodian of rigid gender roles. He enjoys the status of a definition of manhood itself. He is the breadwinner, he is the head of the family, he is a patriotic reformer and even the Sethji of the town who lends money for rebuilding India. He embodies the so-called normal man, someone who can tolerate dance only as a hobby but finds it outrageous as an obsession. As the patriarch, he banishes any disruptive possibility that might challenge this normative pattern. He even reminds his son, there comes the time when you have to do what is expected of you. This is exactly what Judith Butler talks about in their book Gender Trouble. Gender is not something natural. It is something that is performed again and again until it starts looking natural. What is very important here is to understand that none of us choose these performances freely. We are forced to negotiate them. Every time Amritlal reminds Jairaj to be a man, he is enforcing these repeated acts of masculinity and turning them into rituals that sustain patriarchy. Gender feels fixed because it has been drilled into us through these everyday performances of what we wear, how we walk, and who we marry. This is also where the larger theme comes into focus. This theme is of a man's struggle for freedom and happiness under the heavy weight of tradition, the rigid cultural frame of gender, and desires that must always be repressed. Jairaj's long hair in the future and even his choice of guru become symbols of his failure to be a normal man in Amritlal's eyes. Yet for his guru, these same traits would enhance Jairaj's abhinay, his power to embody emotion on stage. Jairaj's wife Ratna playfully adds to this irony when she announces that Jairaj is learning kuchipudi, where men traditionally dress up as women. Amritlal is horrified, but Ratna laughs triumphantly and leaves. Here, as you can tell, dance itself becomes a stage for challenging and mocking patriarchal definitions of masculinity. But the pressure Jairaj faces is crushing. He drinks to numb himself. He tells Ratna that he strongly recommends the drink, it keeps him from crying. He even adds, "Look at me, I never cry." And Ratna replies, "That is because you are a man." That short exchange captures a lot like the way men are taught to suppress emotion, the way masculinity is equated with silence and an inability to cry. Butler even calls the body itself a variable boundary. They write that it is not a fixed thing but a surface where cultural rules about gender and sexuality are written and enforced. Jairaj's long hair, his walk, his desires to dance, all of this marks him as abnormal in Amritlal's world. His body becomes a battleground that is regulated and judged by the rules of compulsory heterosexual masculinity. All of this shows how socially sanctioned stereotype clash with personal ambition and artistic desire. Jairaj is not just fighting his father or Ratna or society, he is fighting the very idea of masculinity he has been forced to internalize. This clash is dramatized in their arguments. When Amritlal asks, "Where is your dance going to lead you? I would like to see what kind of independence you gain with your antiques." Jairaj responds, "The independence to do what I want." Amritlal's authority here hides under the pretext of care, but its real purpose is to reshape his son's desire into his own. Jairaj himself voices this conflict in one of the most painful lines of the play. "The craft of a prostitute to show off her wares. What business did a man have learning such a craft? Of what use could it be to him? No use. So no man would want to learn such a craft. Hence anyone who learned such a craft would not be a man." This is not just Amritlal's prejudice, it is a glimpse of how deeply Jairaj has internalized society's contempt for dance. The art he loves, in his own eyes, is tied to shame, to effeminacy, to something no real man should ever pursue. But here is where the irony of the title comes in. What does it actually mean to dance like a man? In Bharatanatyam, Shiva is not only the destroyer but also Nataraj. In the form of a cosmic dancer, Nataraj embodies both masculine and feminine energies. Every Bharatanatyam dancer is aware of the myth of Shiva as Ardhanarishwar, combining the dance of the eternal man and woman, the unity of Purush, which is the supreme divinity, and Prakriti, which is nature. Shiva is the complete cosmic being as Ardhanarishwar, and he embodies both the strength and compassion of the masculine and feminine principle. To dance like a man, then, would mean to dance like Shiva by not being confined to rigid gender roles, but by embracing androgyny, fluidity, and creation itself. The title also connects directly to Shiva's Tandav, which is described as a dance that both saves and destroys at the same time. So, Tandav is a pictorial allegory of the five eternal energies: Srishti or creation, Sthiti or preservation, Samhara or destruction, Tirodhana or illusion, and Anugrah or release or grace. When performed in joy, it becomes the Anand Tandav. When done in fury, it is the Raudra Tandav. Different traditions even name different variants such as Krishna Tandav, Shiva Tandav, Ravan Tandav, sometimes even Kalika Tandav. And in contrast to this powerful masculine dance, the goddess Parvati is believed to have performed Lasya, which is a dance of happiness, a dance of beauty and grace. It is seen as a response to Shiva's cosmic energy. What is striking though is how the play echoes these myths but twists them. Jairaj longs to dance like Shiva, but he never becomes the cosmic destroyer. He is instead destroyed. He is crushed by patriarchy, his own ambitions, and failure. Ratna too is a kind of Parvati figure, but her dance brings no lasya, no joy or grace, not even for herself. She is bound to the memory of Shankar's death. Her art is even hollowed out by compromise. Even in their invocation of divine models, Jairaj and Ratna falls short. They are just living human lives that cannot carry the transcendence of myth. But Jairaj never gets there. He wants to, but he is constantly pulled back by his father's control, by Ratna's ambitions, and by his own insecurities. He dreams of dance as liberation, but in reality, he remains trapped. That is why the title is so powerful. On the surface, it sounds like a challenge. You are asked to dance like a man. But underneath, it is almost tragic. To dance like a man is something Jairaj never fully achieves. It becomes an ideal, a possibility that belongs more to myth than to actual life. To really dance like a man, you will need to resist culture that equates dance with femininity and to claim a space that patriarchy has denied. One of the most powerful aspects of Dance Like a Man is the way it questions gender roles. It asks questions like, what does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be a woman? And more importantly, who defines these terms? In the play, you will see how both men and women get trapped by society's expectations. Jairaj is told that dance is not manly, while Ratna is constantly reminded of her duties as a wife and mother. Amritlal the patriarch sums it up very clearly when he says, there comes a time when you have to do what is expected of you, and what is expected is always tied to these fixed gender roles. But Mahesh Dattani in the play refuses to accept that. He shows us how gender is not something we are born with, it is something that we perform. The theorist Judith Butler famously called this gender performativity, and the play depicts it beautifully. Jairaj's long hair, his effeminate walk, his devotion to his guru, all of these are read as failures of masculinity. But for Jairaj, they are simply part of who he is. Ratna, on the other hand, manipulates these roles to her advantage. She knows when to appear as the dutiful daughter-in-law to please Amritlal and when to assert herself as a strong woman who will not give up on her dance. And that is the irony. While Jairaj struggles against patriarchy, Ratna learns to play within its rules. She agrees to Amritlal's conditions, she accepts compromises, and in the process, she manages to keep her own career alive. In some way, she is societally more masculine than Jairaj because she learns how to survive in a man's world. But this survival comes at a cost. Ratna destroys Jairaj the man, just as Amritlal destroys Jairaj the dancer. In one of the most heartbreaking confrontations, Jairaj cries out to Ratna, I want you to give me back my self esteem. You took it when you insisted on top billing in all our programs. You took it when you made me dance my weakest items. You took it when you arranged the lighting so that I was literally dancing in your shadow. And when you called me names in front of other people, names I feel ashamed to repeat even in private. And you call me disgusting. Here, the double pressure becomes unbearable. Amritlal's authority reduces Jairaj's art to weakness, while Ratna's ambition reduces his marriage to rivalry. Jairaj is left with neither dignity as a dancer nor confidence as a man. And yet, what is striking is that Jairaj himself is caught up in the very gender biases that have destroyed him. In a bitter moment, he tells Ratna, no matter how clever an actress you are, you can't convince me that you are playing the part of devoted mother very well. You would not even know where to start. Here, Jairaj retreats into the essentialism of fixed gender roles, blames Ratna for failing as a mother and holds her responsible for Shankar's death. For a man who has suffered so much under patriarchal definitions of masculinity, it is deeply ironic that he falls back on the same framework to wound his wife. But Ratna does not find happiness either. Ironically, her deliberate ploys to overshadow Jairaj when they dance together push him into alcoholism and even contribute to the tragic death of their son. That loss undercuts the very patriarchal ideals of marriage and lineage that Amritlal viewed so highly. For Amritlal, Shankar could have represented hope. It could have been an opportunity of raising a grandson who might grow into the man his father never became. But Jairaj had other dreams for Shankar. He longed to teach Shankar to dance. He said that he would show him the dance of Shiva, the dance of a man, and when he is ready, he will bring him to his grandfather and make him dance on his head, the Tandav Nritya, the lord of dance, beating his drum and trampling on the demon. What is striking here is the shift in Jairaj's imagination of Shiva. Dattani also points us towards a different vision of gender. This vision is more fluid and less restrictive. He brings in the myth of Shiva as Ardhanarishwar. Shiva represents both strength and compassion, both the masculine and the feminine. Through this image, the play suggests that true wholeness comes not from rigid gender roles but from integration. And that is really what androgyny is about. It is not just a biological idea of having both male and female organs. It is about the ability to live in an integrative way, to be both assertive and yielding, independent and dependent, expressive and instrumental. In other words, it is about balance. But patriarchy does not see it that way. Patriarchy insists that gender equals sex, that men and women are naturally different, with men being rational and women emotional. If these qualities start to mix, that is, if a man is emotional or if a woman is too strong, the whole structure of patriarchy feels threatened. An emotional man is not seen as masculine enough, while a powerful woman is accused of stepping out of her place. That is why androgyny is so subversive. It unsettles the entire logic of patriarchy. And if gender is always a performance, then it can never be fully true or false. As Butler puts it, if the inner truth of gender is a fabrication, then genders can be neither true or false but only produced as the truth effects of a discourse. This is why Jairaj never fully succeeds as a dancer even after his constant effort. His individual potential is crushed under the weight of these repeated performances society demands from him. What also comes to my mind at this point is Simone de Beauvoir's famous line, "One is not born but becomes a woman." In this play, we could extend that idea that no one is born a man either. Jairaj is always struggling to become one in his father's eyes, but the goal keeps slipping away. Judith Butler takes this even further. She argues that even what we call sex is not purely natural. It is also culturally constructed. In her words, this construct called sex is as culturally constructed as gender. Perhaps it was always already gender, with the consequence that the distinction between sex and gender turns out to be no distinction at all. Think about it. The usual scientific markers, genitalia, chromosomes, hormones do not always line up in a neat male-female way. Even biologists admit that the binary model of human sexuality is too simplistic. So there is no single objective or natural sex. It is all constructed, it is performed and repeated. This is exactly why trans people often face an identity crisis. Conventions force them into a binary that does not fit, when in reality, bodies and identities have always been more fluid than that. If the rigid dichotomy did not exist in the first place, their lives would have been much easier. And yet, in the everyday world of the play, patriarchy wins more often than not. Jairaj drinks to hide his pain, Ratna undermines him to secure her own success. Lata, who is talented, is told by her fiancé Vishwas that she can dance but only if she also gives him children. Even here, her art is allowed only within the framework of marriage and motherhood. What we see in Jairaj's struggle is not just an individual conflict but the beginning of a pattern. The weight of expectations does not end with him. Jairaj places his own hopes on Shankar and dreams of turning him into the dancer he could never become. Later, Jairaj and Ratna both project their frustrations onto Lata, and so the cycle continues. Each generation is caught between personal desires and its demands. Lata herself tries to resist this inheritance when she says, "That is one thing I will never do. Bore my children talking about the failures in my life." It is her attempt to step outside the cycle, though whether she succeeds is left uncertain. And yet, the same old struggles resurface in her own relationship. The irony is that when Vishwas objects to the erotic Ashtapadi Lata performs, Jairaj reminds him that Ratna had danced it 30 years earlier. Vishwas admires Ratna's courage for defying middle-class notions of femininity, and he even praises Jairaj's liberality in letting his wife perform such a piece. Yet when it comes to his own marriage, he draws the line. He would rather have Lata not cross that boundary. This makes it pretty evident how patriarchal double standards survive across generations. Courage is admired in the past but discouraged in the present, and Vishwas himself is telling of where India is headed. As the son of a rich mithai wala who has made his fortune in black market dealings, he represents the new urban elite. He is wealthy, pragmatic, but with little real engagement with tradition. For him, Bharatanatyam is not a passion, but a hobby he can permit or restrict. He is willing to let Lata continue dancing, but only if she fulfills the condition of giving him 2 children. In this, Vishwas reflects a new middle-class India that is willing to tolerate art, but only within the limits of social expectations. Dattani himself once said, "My plays show that both men and women pay the consequences for not playing by prescribed gender roles." And that is exactly what we see here. Jairaj pays with his career and self-esteem. Ratna pays with her marriage and happiness. Lata too faces the same cycle of compromise. So when we look at Dance Like a Man through this lens, it becomes a critique of how gender roles are enforced generations after generation and how they stop people from truly being themselves. To To really understand dance like a man, we also need to look at the history of Bharatanatyam itself, because this play is also about how an entire art form was shaped, controlled, and in many ways distorted by history. Traditionally, Bharatanatyam was performed by devadasis. Devadasis were women dedicated to the temple and to the god Shiva as the cosmic dancer in the form of Nataraj. His dance was believed to hold the rhythm of the universe itself. It had creation, preservation, and destruction in just one movement. The Devadasis were seen as servants of the gods and were even symbolically married to the deity of the shrine. Their first performances often took place in temples, sometimes in front of kings who would reward them. And it is important to remember that in those times, many Devdasis were educated, respected, and deeply involved in temple life. At the same time, remember that we cannot romanticize this history as some kind of utopia for Devdasis. Scholars like Spivak and C.S. Lakshmi have pointed out that Devdasis' position was tightly controlled. Their exceptional sexual status was linked to economic structures. At times, unless one girl in a family was dedicated to the temple, the family could not gain certain economic benefits, and any system dependent on patronage, whether from priests, aristocrats, or art lovers, would always carry elements of coercion and exploitation. So, while Devdasis were respected in some contexts, their lives were also shaped by power, control, and survival. Over time, things changed. With colonial rule and middle class morality, the Devdasi system was attacked and it was gradually dismantled. Reformers called Bharatanatyam indecent, even obscene. There were many historical reasons behind this shift. Some link it to the decline of Hindu culture under Muslim rule, while at the same time British administrators also openly branded Devdasis as prostitutes. And because many Devdasis came from poor, lower caste families, they were often exploited by upper caste men. In 1892, the Madras Reform Group launched the Anti-Nautch campaign, which portrayed Bharatanatyam as indecent and degrading to women. This view fed into broader middle-class anxieties about respectability, which worked to suppress the art forms of lower-class women. By 1947, the legislation in Madras went as far as to outlaw temple dancing altogether. Lands owned by Devdasis were confiscated and their culture was dismantled. It was very ironic that around the same time, Bharatanatyam was being embraced by middle-class women. The dance form moved from temples to stages and were repackaged as a symbol of cultural pride. But in the process, the dance was sanitized. Its erotic aspects were pushed aside and it was packaged as a respectable cultural product for Indian and international audiences. In fact, even in the so-called revival of Bharatanatyam, you can see clear ideological biases. E. Krishna Iyer is credited with reviving Bharatanatyam, but even he made a distinction between non-professional dancers, whom he called cultured, and professional dancers, whom he called the Devdasis. As C.S. Lakshmi points out, although Iyer praised many Devdasis for their art, he never used the word cultured for them. He instead believed that a woman dancer should be modest. This attitude continued into later debates. You can read up about the controversy around a well-known dancer Rukmini Devi. In her performances, she replaced Shringar, which is the erotic, with Bhakti, which is the devotional. This turned Bharatanatyam into a commodity, something which was displayed at cultural festivals rather than a living spiritual tradition. Dattani makes this history very real in the play through the character of Chenni Amma. Chenni Amma is the 75-year-old Devdasi who is the last link to the Mysore school of dance. She is reduced to selling flowers on temple steps and completely forgotten by society. Ratna is even discouraged from learning from her. When Amritlal bribes Ratna to give up Chenni Amma's teaching, it is not just one woman losing her guru, but an entire tradition being silenced. As Ratna herself observes, she does not mind at all being poor and lonely. What she is frustrated about is that in her youth, she did not have the freedom to express her art. And this silencing is where Ratna's own story takes shape. Though Ratna is ambitious, she never truly becomes a great dancer. Cut off from the Devdasi tradition, she learns how to satisfy audiences and critiques, but she cannot reach that aesthetic depth that Chenni Amma embodied. This depth is the perfect blend of the sensual and the spiritual. Ratna's art becomes polished, but it remains hollow. In the end, she is little more than an audience pleaser. This forgotten history is central to the play because it shows us how personal ambition, patriarchy, and colonial morality intersect. Bharatanatyam was once a form of divine expression, but now it has become a site of negotiation between respectability and passion. In his playwright's note to the play, Dattani himself describes the dance form's fascinating history of oppression and renaissance, and the way it has been commodified in modern India. For young girls from wealthy families, dance often becomes just another way to improve their marriage prospects. But for men who want to pursue it seriously, the path is much harder. They face indifference from the upper classes, moral judgment from the middle classes, and even a lingering fascination with Western culture that sidelines their art. So, when Dattani talks about this history, he's pointing us to exactly this tension of how an art form that should have been liberating was instead reshaped by power, and how those wounds continue to echo in the lives of characters like Ratna, Jairaj, and even Lata. One more fascinating aspect about Dance Like a Man is how it shows that colonial influence did not end with independence, it rather followed people home. And we see that most clearly in the character of Amritlal, Jairaj's father. On paper, Amritlal looks like a nationalist hero. He fought for India's freedom, he opposed practices like dowry and untouchability, and he even allowed his son to marry outside the community, which was rare at that time. He calls himself a reformer. But look a little deeper, and you notice that his views are shaped as much by colonial morality as by Indian tradition. To explain this with an example, think about Amritlal's rejection of the Devadasi system. To him, Devdasis are not artists but unfortunate women in need of reform. That is exactly how British administrators described them in the 19th century. They reduced these women to prostitutes and ignored their roles as being custodians of culture. So even though Amritlal fought against the British politically, he absorbed their ideas culturally. He sees Bharatanatyam as shameful when performed by a man and indecent when learned from a Devdasi. There is a revealing moment in the play when he says to Ratna that a woman in a man's world may be considered progressive, but a man in a woman's world is pathetic. Notice how this reflects not just patriarchy but also colonial binaries. There is the strict separation of masculine and feminine, of public and private, of who is respectable and indecent. In many ways, Amritlal is carrying forward the very prejudices that colonialism left behind. This creates a very painful irony. Jairaj is desperate to find independence through dance and to embrace a different idea of masculinity, but his father insists that true independence means following the norms of society. He cannot see that real freedom might mean letting his son choose art over cricket and passion over respectability. And that is where the play connects the personal with the political. Amritlal's house becomes a metaphor for post-colonial India itself. It is a space where colonial morality and nationalist pride mix in complicated ways. He wants to rebuild society on respectable terms, but in doing so, he suffocates the very creativity and freedom he claims to value. By placing this conflict inside a family, Dattani shows us how deeply these colonial shadows still linger. It is not just about dance, but about how identities, relationships, and even definitions of manhood and womanhood continue to be shaped by a past that refuses to go away. After all the conflicts, betrayals, and disappointments, Dance Like a Man ends on a strangely beautiful note. Jairaj and Ratna have spent their lives trapped by ambition, patriarchy, and regret. In the end, they come together one last time. But this moment does not happen while they are alive. It happens in death. In the closing vision of the play, Jairaj and Ratna dance in perfect harmony. Jairaj says, "We dance perfectly, in unison, not missing a step or a beat. We were only human. We lacked the grace, we lacked the brilliance, we lacked the magic to dance like God." It is haunting because it is here that they have finally achieved what they could never manage in life. They finally achieve oneness. So what does this mean? On one level, it is deeply ironic. The harmony of body and spirit of dancer and dance only arrives when it is too late. In life, they were divided by jealousy, by compromises, by social pressures. But in death, all of that falls away and art becomes the space where they are finally free. On another level, it ties back to the play's larger themes. Bharatanatyam once blended the erotic and the spiritual, the human and the divine. That essence was lost when the dance was sanitized, commodified, and stripped of its depth. Jairaj and Ratna's final dance seems to recover that essence, if only for a moment. They are not dancing for critiques, audiences, or for approval. They dance as souls bound together beyond gender and patriarchy. But Dattani does not let us on an entirely hopeful note. While Jairaj and Ratna dance in death, their daughter Lata's future does not look very promising. She She has talent, but she has also entered into a marriage that conditions her art. By the end, her baby's first word is jalebi, which is a nod to her husband's commercial world and not to the artistic tradition her parents lived and died for. The cycle of compromises seems ready to continue. As Dattani himself noted in an interview, within the Gujarati community, manhood is often defined by the ability to make money. Viswas embodies this idea perfectly. His casual remarks show that earning and accumulating wealth are his top interests, which make him far closer to Amritlal than to Jairaj, who never conformed to society's models of what a real man is supposed to be. The Lata Vishwas marriage signals a return to this heteronormative materialistic status quo. The temporary disruption represented by Jairaj and Ratna is quietly erased as the next generation folds back into respectability and conventionality. This sense of repetition is also built right into the structure of the play. The characters double up on stage. Old Jairaj plays his father Amritlal, young Jairaj also plays Vishwas, and young Ratna plays her daughter Lata. This doubling shows us that although one half of the play is set in the 1940s and the other in the 1980s, the obstacle remains the same for those who try to embrace the alternative world of dance. At the same time, it also hints at a possibility that everyone, even someone as unlikely as a Gujarati businessman like Vishwas, carries the potential to be a part of the alternative visions embedded in the dance form. Dattani himself once said, I would like to challenge the assumptions of what is Indian. What we need to do now is to look at those forms and say, we are approaching the 21st century. This is who we are and this is our legacy. So where do we take that? That question lingers at the end of the play. Perhaps the real task is not just to dance like a man or like a woman, but to dance like a human being free of the burdens history has placed on us. The ending leaves us with powerful questions. Is art truly liberating in a world that is weighed down by patriarchy and colonial morality? Or is its transcendence always fragile and fleeting, something that can only be glimpsed in rare moments like Jairaj and Ratna's final dance? I hope you can now see that Dance Like a Man is not just the story of Jairaj and Ratna. It is about the larger tensions of art and authority, the weights of history and patriarchy, and the fragile ways in which identity is performed, resisted, and undone. We have moved through questions of masculinity, androgyny, colonial morality, and the forgotten devadasi tradition, but there are still so many threads I could not fully unravel here. To keep this video smooth, I have left aside several other perspectives because the play is too layered to be exhausted in a single discussion. And maybe that is Rattani's real gift. He leaves us with a text that dances differently each time we read it. The real question this play raises is not whether one dances like a man or a woman, but whether one can dance freely at all in a world determined to dictate the rhythm. This is where I will pause for today. There is still so much more that I could have said about Dance Like a Man, but I hope this discussion gives you a sense of its richness. If there are other texts you would like me to analyze in this way, do share your suggestions. I would be glad to take them up. I'll see you very soon in my next video. Until then, keep reading and keep learning.